panel is composed of 3 IC Manage customers. Next, I'd like to introduce Jacob. Jacob is a director from Broadcom, a director of IC design at Broadcom, specializing in CMOS and RF design. Jacob joined Broadcom through the acquisition of Innovent Systems. Without further ado, let me give you Jacob.
Thank you. So I represent a really narrow slice of design than the other topics, I guess. I focus mostly on analog and RF design. One of the challenges is we want to reuse as much IP as we can. But within our group, that really creates a conflict. The block designer wants to constantly improve the block, while the chip lead wants to have a stable release. And if we kind of do this in the same environment, it causes a lot of chaos. So one of the challenges is how do we manage possibly many different versions of the same block? The same block could also go into many different chips or many different radios, and we have to know which ones have bugs, which ones don't, which has the latest features, and it gets to be really, really chaotic trying to keep track of all these things. Also, because of the way we've been doing things, is we want to have a lot of flexibility. We're really pressured by time to market. We have one customer that literally wants chips. When chips come back, they want silicon in their hands within 10 days. And in the old days, it would take us 10 days just to bring the chip up. So we're under a lot of pressure to get things out the door correctly. And with so much chips going out, we actually would have a hard time knowing what we're even taping out. So we found that we're doing a lot of XORing of GDS files just to figure out which LNA did we put on that chip. So by being able to build chips, or even just the radios, clearly defines the contents of the chip, is extremely valuable for us. It's clear what was in the tape out, and then also it's clear what we change between revisions, between like an A0 and an A1 or an A0 and a B0. Sometimes we have different, probably like all of you, have different versions in production at the same time, and we got to know which version has different versions of the subblocks. Some of the best practices that we've put in recently, again, are very specific to our team. So our team, 90% of the work is using Cadence. We draw schematics, and we do custom hand layout. And again, analog designers think differently. They're not real familiar with version control tools. The whole concept of branching is very foreign to them, and they don't care to learn it. So we have to impose certain restrictions on them so that they'll follow best practices, and we also can't get in their way. As soon as they just start saying, oh, you guys are putting too much restrictions on us, they can get all our methodologies kicked out because we're just too much of a burden. So one of the things that we've been able to do recently is just make a simple rule. If you're designing a block, it has to be self-contained within a Cadence library. This really simplifies IP reuse and bug tracking. Another thing that was kind of enforced recently is using IC Manage is now you really can't check in cells one at a time from like a schematic or a layout. So we've been able to push designers to check in changes as collections. Before, a layout engineer, they would have to like check out a lot of different cells to fix a DRC error. And they would fix it in one layer, check it in, fix it in another block, check that in, fix it in a different block, and then check that in. By forcing them to use a different tool to do check-ins, they can check in all those changes at one shot. That way, if it turns out it was a bad decision, we can easily roll that out. So just a slight tool change have got us moving in that direction. Another thing that we're trying to enforce now is before, when people needed a new block or a new feature, they would just copy a block and then start adding it, which from an IP management perspective is really bad. All of a sudden, you've just cut any kind of version history. You've lost all traceability. And to them, it's just like, oh, I just right-click and copy. So now we've really encouraged them to branch the design. And we've taught them what branching means and how this gives us the advantage of being able to figure out where the different blocks are being used. Some of the must-haves that we identified is we need to be able to identify where the IP is being used. And this is really critical. A lot of times, especially with analog blocks, they look fine in simulation. They actually look fine during bring up. It might even look fine in production. And all of a sudden, you hit a certain process corner or a certain weird effect, and you have a huge fallout. And you have to identify all the different radios that are using that block because you have to roll in screens at ATE to catch that bug. I had one chip that just started failing miserably because the fab forgot to change a filter in one of their, gas filtration systems. And it just had one block that was very sensitive to that, and trying to identify all the radios that had that same block so we could put in a specific test was very challenging. So we need to know where all the IP is being used. We also need to be able to apply bugs on this IP and allow these bugs to bubble up to the top, so that if a new chip lead comes in and they end up using that bad block, they'll automatically see that bug before tape out and know that they have to either change the block or make sure that they have the appropriate test to catch failures after the chip comes back. As far as measurable and concrete results, we've only recently moved over to IC Manage. We're starting our second chip right now, but some of the things that we can easily see we're going to gain is having confidence in what we're taping out. I kind of covered that before, where we'd have to run around doing XOR and GDS files. Being able to alert chip leads of errors and blocks that we've already identified so that they can actually tape out a chip with as few errors. And then to quickly and easily configure new projects so that we can reuse IP.